Cool. All right, we are live. Hiten Shah, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. You've been so open about sharing your thoughts on the internet for a very long time, so it's kind of like hard for us to find like a thing to talk about. But I think where we ended up landing on and where I want to kick off the conversation today is you had this post, I guess, on X.com is what tweets are called now. And when I read that, I was like, I just want to dive deep with you into it. So, you mind if I just read a blurb from the post to
Yeah,
kind of
please. I
let the
probably need to
audience?
remember it. I tweet way
Okay.
too much. So
Cool. Maybe
please.
it's not that long, so I'll just like read the whole thing and
Yeah,
then I'd love to
awesome.
kind of ask you what inspired that, okay? So,
Mhm.
it goes like this. If the best talent has real agency and can't get work done, it's not about the talent and their behavior. It's an environment fit problem. The wrong environment can turn A players into spectators, and bad processes waste their urgency. Politics blunts their judgment, endless approvals kill their momentum, and over time they stop pushing because the system made their edge irrelevant. Their edge still exists, it's just not usable in the environment. The dangerous part is how easy it is to misdiagnose. Leaders see output slow down and assume the talent wasn't as good as they thought. They start adding more process, more oversight, more alignment. The result is a slow suffocation disguised as management. You don't get the best from the best by simply hiring them. You get it by stripping away the friction, clearing the noise, and making sure every hour they spend is pointed at something that matters. If you're not willing to do that, you're better off not hiring them at all, because in the wrong environment, even the best will fail and it won't be their fault. So first of
Poetry.
all, incredible tweet post.
Thank you. Yeah.
What inspired that?
Work. Just years of work and working and having thankfully seen lots of different environment beyond my own. And what I mean by that is since I was 4 years old, my dad told me you should be a founder, entrepreneur. He used the word entrepreneur at the time, or maybe even neither of those words. I don't recall, but work for yourself, I think, is where he went to. He's a physician and all that. So historically, I had the responsibility of the environment. I would almost say the ultimate responsibility. If you're a founder, CEO, it's your responsibility. It's like everyone else's too, but it's yours to fix, to improve, to change, etc. And so I had only built my own environments. Then in 2024, late 20, what year was it? No. Yeah, 2024. Yeah, early 2024, I think May-ish, I got a job at Dropbox. And it was my first job in my life because I sold my company to Dropbox. And so I got to see like basically a public company from the inside in a way that I hadn't before. I'd spent enough time with people that work at public companies, of course, and also startups way more. So had a lot of contextualized like opinions and takes. And then I was in that in an environment where I could not do what I did as CEO founder in the environment because I had created it. So everything was my responsibility. In this environment, nothing was my responsibility. But as a founder, if you're going into an environment where you go from everything's my responsibility to nothing's my responsibility, I think there's been some recent things about not introspecting and things like that. So I'm going to ignore that for now. But like, I think a lot about thinking. I don't consider it introspection in that sense because my goal is to understand things and try to explain it to other people. Like that's just something I gravitate towards and enjoy doing. So as I was in this environment that I found myself in that I didn't get to create, I got to see so many things about how those environments work, how they're created. And the real inception of that post was obviously many years, but the one moment, and it wasn't a moment, but it was like a set of experiences in like, let's say the first 6 months of being at Dropbox. I stayed about 15 months. So let's say a third of my way in. I had this like realization that the larger a organization gets, and this is going to be obvious to both of you and everyone listening. So I'm not about to say anything fantastic, I promise. The harder it is for anyone that's in leadership, manager, executive, CEO, VP, director, you name it, to actually understand what's going on the ground. I was, for many reasons that I think are all good, maybe one that's bad, but most are good. I was a product manager at Dropbox. Like that was my like title in the HR and all that. And I did not manage anyone. But obviously product managers manage everyone. So that's a different story. We're not going to get into that. But by being on the ground doing the dirt, everything changed in terms of the way I thought about leadership. And that's the culmination of all that is in that post. And I'm glad you pointed out that one because I say a lot of stuff, but that one is very special because a founder can relate to it and a team member at any company can relate to it and be like, oh, that was either me or I've seen that before or whatever. Because like, to be honest, I don't think there are really shitty people at work. I think there's only shitty environments for them. And I have tons of context now that can prove that out. And environment is like entire company, team, a meeting. Like we could get into like what that really means. And I'm happy to give some examples of how we thought about it as a startup and all the contrasts. But at the end of the day, this came from this idea that like leadership does not know what's going on the ground. And if leadership does not know what's going on the ground, they are not able to act, they are not actually creating, inspiring, or even changing, evolving the environment. Because if you don't know what's going on in the environment, then you, in effect, have no control over the environment. And the higher up you get at like a Facebook or a Dropbox or Google, the less you have an understanding of the environment that an IC, as we call it, an individual contributor, is dealing with. And having to have been one and never been one in my life, all of a sudden for 15 months gave me this compression of that contrast. And I also studied organizational behavior in school. I don't remember a single professor's name, but I did study that. I made my own major and the stuff it just smacks me in my head and then I go get upset at someone or something. Thankfully, my boss at Dropbox understood me. So it was very easy to work with him on that, but I don't know anyone else that can manage that kind of reaction that I would have to things. And those reactions then get synthesized and then I come up with something like this. So long story for a relatively short post or tweet or whatever we call it these days. But that's kind of the background.
And is that something that you thought it was going to be as important when you were going through the transaction and maybe evaluating like different potential acquirers? Is that something that you knew, hey, like this is actually really going to matter? And I'm curious, like through that process or maybe even after that process, like what did you learn about how to best evaluate the environment when you're not inside the environment?
So I'm going to say something blunt. And the blunt thing I'm going to say is when you sell a company, you can't care about what happens after. You can only care about what they think happens after when you're selling a company. You personally cannot care about what happens after. I know that sounds really messed up. I think the simple reason I would say that is you don't know what's really going on in the company. When you get in there, you can only figure out what's going to happen and how to make it happen, whatever it is you want or they want. Prior to that, you're in a process that most founders don't go through very often. And you're dealing with lots of stuff, lots of tension, lots of drama, lawyers, diligence, all these things. And if you try to think about what's going to happen after beyond whatever you need to talk about with the team over there and everything, I think you end up getting hung up and attached to things you shouldn't be because it's not your environment, especially coming from your own environment.
So just to be clear, you're saying definitely care about like, for example, like if there's like a dollar amount associated with the sale, like or like some amount due at close or something like that. You're saying obviously care about those things. Make sure you get,
or even what the company thinks you can do. I'm not saying don't care. I'm not saying, sorry. What I mean is don't get attached to the outcome after the acquisition is done and you're at the company, because whatever that is, you're going to have to figure it out. If you haven't worked there before ever, you're not going to know all the nuances. Also, even if you worked there before, but the whole entire executive team changed, you don't know anything about how it operates.
oh,
right?
that makes
like
total
maybe
sense.
you know, like, and again, that's a little opposite of what I said, but maybe you know what's going on the ground. If you're on the ground at one of these companies, then go back. But the executive stuff, if they change, all of that changes, right? So
I got a master's in finance. We had some M&A classes and that generally useless. But what I would say is one of the stats I do remember is like the vast majority of acquisitions are not accretive or they fail, you know, like that. And There's a bunch of reasons for that, but I suspect that everyone goes into an acquisition thinking it's a win and everyone thinks it's going to be great. It doesn't surprise me to hear you say, hey, like, if you think you're in control or you think you have agency on exactly what's going to happen post-acquisition with this product and this team in this area, like, don't get emotionally attached to that. It's an idea. You might be wrong, but there's probably 100 other ways it's going to play out. So don't get overly connected because you don't have the context of what's happening inside the acquiring company.
You don't.
Not only leading up to the acquisition.
You will not till you get there.
Yeah.
You will not get it till you get there. And even when you get there, sometimes you don't get enough of it. It depends on what your role is, right? Like as an IC without an amazing boss, I wouldn't know what I needed to know to do my job. Like honestly, you folks know you've had bosses that I'm sure are great. And
yeah, I mean,
if
you're an IC in a large organization, or honestly any organization, if I'm honest, and there's nobody to give you guidance on what to do, you literally have you're untethered, right? Like you're floating. You want to do something useful. You don't know which levers even exist. You don't know who cares about what. And you don't know what's going to be, and I'm a big believer in incentives driving people's behavior. So you don't know what the incentives are because like no one's telling you what's going to get rewarded or not rewarded. So you're just kind of like a talent blob with nothing to latch onto is kind of like what it sometimes feels like.
I'll also give you a really good example as a founder, right? As a founder, like if there's an escalation of any kind in the company, I have to deal with it or I hear about it. If someone else dealt with it, even better. That means I hired well, whatever, right? Or whatever. It's a great team. I prefer that. But like, so an escalation to me was bad. But going to Dropbox, like I learned escalation is not bad. In fact, escalation is required.
It's how things get done. Yeah.
But as a founder, you're like, no, escalation means I built the wrong environment or something's wrong with the environment. In these companies, no one owns the environment, in my opinion. Thus, escalations are required to keep the rough edges sharpened and tune this or tune that. So I learned this from the executives that I saw there and the managers that I saw how they operated, or even the people who were very successful who might not be that talented versus the people that were very talented and not successful. And the one word I can say is escalations. Mm-hmm. However way you want to define it, there's other synonyms for that.
Yeah,
and
managing
sometimes,
up.
Or sometimes the escalation is like a bad word all of a sudden, so you got to use some other word like code red, code yellow, this, that. Like I've heard all of it now, even just in 15 months, and it's like, again, these words matter because these words dictate the environment. Because we're talking about certain things. Like at one point, like I saw so many code reds, we couldn't call them code reds anymore. And then as I started talking to friends, they're like, yeah, we experienced that over here. We experienced that at this company. I'm like, oh, cool. Safe stuff to talk about. Great. Like no more code reds. Why? They get abused. They get abused for reasons that are just nonsensical and not about the work. They're about some human, some promotion, some org structure thing. And that's why someone says code red on that thing that maybe shouldn't have had a code red. So that's a very good example of what I saw and just the types of things that, regardless of where you're at, once you hit a certain size, these kind of things creep in.
And just to clarify, like your point, like you were talking right now as like your point of view from a founder that got acquired into a company and just was not able to like maybe get full visibility into like the environment until you get into the company. But is that true? For example, let's say you were coming as a PM at Stripe and all of a sudden you were interviewing.
I think it's true. I think it's true. I think it's true in all circumstances I can think of, because that firsthand, I'm in there. I have my points of view. They have theirs. Eventually, those points of view have to be mine. Like all those things like impact it. So even if you have great people to guide you and all that, that's awesome. You're still day zero there, right? Like there's those books of like the first 90 days. I have that book sitting somewhere here, right? And I read it. I'm like, okay, cool. Don't do this, do that, you know? And then I showed it to my co-founder. We were about a month in and she's like, we messed up this and this. I'm like, I know. You always are worried about what we messed up. That's cool. That's why I love you. But like, we're good. Don't worry, right? Like, but like, it's like all these things, right? Like, it's like, go native, don't go native, wear the stuff they wear. Like they got all this stuff going on and it just happens naturally. Like our general manager would wear these black shirts like all the time. And that was just his style and thing. A lot of people were wearing black shirts eventually, like here and there. And it's just the things that happen when random things I noticed, right, about the work, but even that impacts the environment.
I think it's just how humans are wired. We're like social animals, and I think we're wired to understand where we sit status-wise. despite the best efforts to make flat organizations where people are like peers, everyone knows who's running the company. Everyone knows the CEO. Everyone knows who decides who stays and who goes and who gets promoted and who gets raises and, all that stuff. Who gets the sexy new project when it comes up or the impactful new initiative. So people are always are very, again, this goes back to incentives. I think we're very deeply sensitive to incentives and we play the game that is created for us.
Yep.
Like it's the environment. I mean, the incentives are
That's
a
right.
really large part of the environment design,
That's right.
which is why if you study like really good or any management people that you look up to, it's kind of like you get what you measure kind of thing. So it's go ahead,
by the way,
Marc.
what is the difference in your point of view between culture and environment?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. So let me talk about environment and then we'll break that down and you folks will probably have a better answer than me because I only think about environment. So that's where I'll start. And I like
maybe why do you only think about environment? Is that
because I think too many people think about culture. Like too much of the bias is on, hey, culture. And I'm like, well, the environment creates
almost
the
like
wrong word.
Is environment just like more of a thing you feel like you have agency to mold, whereas culture is like an emergent property of the environment?
We used to think culture was values and values on the wall, but really culture is behavior and environment dictates behavior. That's kind of probably the way I would like crisply react to what you're saying, which is like if the environment, so what comes first, the culture or the environment? And there's only one answer. It's the environment, not the culture. Culture doesn't
environment
come
has
first.
to come first.
Yeah.
There is no culture before an environment exists for culture to emerge in. Yeah.
Right. But now we have another word which does come before culture and environment, which is vibe. So it's actually vibe, environment, culture. And you might ask me, what's the difference between a vibe and a culture? Well, everyone's got a vibe. So us humans walking around have a vibe. Okay. We listen to some music, see a car, talk to someone. There's some common vibe or there's a vibe coming out of that thing or whatever. Right. But that environment we create actually comes off of the vibe of people, which is not culture, because vibe is like it's like how people feel around you. That's like one example of it, right? So how people feel around you as a CEO or a founder, especially at a smaller company, turns into the environment because you're bringing people onto your thing. And then the environment gets created. And then as a result of work happening, which is behaviors just being manifested and people executing, that turns into the culture. And that's why they say new humans come in, the culture evolves. We never say we're building culture or we're creating culture. Culture is evolving. To your point, Ben, right? Like you're like, yeah, well, culture just happens. Like, unfortunately, yes. Now, can you prune it? Can you tune it? Can you, smooth out the edges? Absolutely, 100%. But the way you do that is by messing with the environment. You can't do that by like for example, my boss came into the company about 2 or 3 months after me at Dropbox, and he saw a bunch of stuff for maybe a month or two. He had a lot of things to do on the executive side. And then at the offsites we had, I watched him make attempts at changing the product environment in with the product managers and product people. We took this guy Shreyas's course as a team, right? We tried to implement a bunch of stuff as a team. We had, I remember one specific instance where he had an entire exercise where all the PMs were in a room for the sort of product we were working on. And we went through a whole bunch of exercises, that I'm sure you folks have gone through around trying to figure out how do we get better by like pointing out like areas where we might not be that great. One of the topics was actually escalation. Right? So when I think about it, a great leader is actually trying to understand the environment and tune it towards what? Their vibe. My boss was tuning the environment towards his vibe. He wouldn't describe it like that at all, and I wouldn't expect him to, but I would describe it like that. But the thing is, I've known him for 20 years. We've never worked together until then, and I know his vibe. So I can honestly say, oh, okay, that's what he's doing. And if we all I appreciate his vibe. I get it. So I was actually the one helping people try to be like, hey, this is what Morgan is all about. This is what this is all about. But again, I'll say one other thing about this. He was the new exec that came in and had a manual. So for the first month he was there, I was handing everyone his manual.
You mean literally or
yeah, he had a manual, like an operating manual about him.
So he had like a README kind of document, like a README file. I've read these about people, and it's like, here's what I value, here's what I care about,
Yeah.
here's how I like things done,
Yeah.
like all that.
And
You're amplifying that, sharing it around.
Yeah, I'm like, this is Morgan. Like, this is the guy we're working with. Like, here you go. He gave us his handbook and how he thinks. Like, that's why, like, when people would come up with, oh, Morgan this, Morgan, I'm like, wait, he said this over here in this definitive document about him. I think we're good, right? Like, because, other execs were not like him. Obviously, they're all different. So
and that contributed to your to your sense of his vibe. And then some of what you picked up from his vibe was, observing him behave. Some of it was literally like explicit, like here's what I care about in his document. And then your take, because I think it's a really interesting, we're assembling kind of like a mental map that I've never had before in my head. So I'm trying to kind of figure out the pieces. So it's like people working together or a thing happening, we're at like pre-Big Bang. There's nothing. It's just like vacuum, right? And then someone with a vibe and maybe another person with a vibe come together, each bring in their own vibe. They start jamming. An idea or an initiative or something starts to occur. They start making some decisions and they start doing things and executing, which establishes basically if someone's watching them on the camera, they're like, wow, that's their culture. This is how they operate, right? But that's just them doing their vibe thing. And then at some point, more people join, each of them bring in their vibe, the culture evolves. And at some point, a leader might join that organization who's high. There's a reason they hired this person. Like they think this person can really level us up, take us to the next stage of growth. They come in with their vibe and they look at the culture and they're like, not this culture is not
so they look
aligned
at
with my vibe. So I need to control the environment to modify the culture.
They don't look at the culture, they look at the environment, but they call it culture.
Got it. Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
because if you think about it, it's an operating environment.
But it's like the culture is the thing where they see the levers for making change. I'm sorry, the environment is the thing where they see the levers for making change.
Correct.
Yeah, because remember, like I think when we talk about culture, it is very intangible. But if we talk about behaviors, it's not. And if we talk about environment, it is right now because I think people are not taught this, but it's not. It's like very practical. I don't have to be fuzzy. And let me give you folks some examples. That way, like it's concrete on what I mean by environment from my own company, and I think that'll help. So,
just before that, Marc, did I interrupt you? Were you going to say something before Hiten shares examples?
No, I think the only connection that I was going to make that makes a lot of sense, right? Is like, I think Ben and I have been obsessed about like, what is the best way to like operate as a leader? Is it to like, kind of try to compensate for your weaknesses and like just like get it like below like, or like above like a threshold, right? Or doubling down on your superpowers and really like what makes it really easy for you to operate at a great level. And I think that's like kind of doubling down on your vibe and like pushing the environment down. That's basically kind of what you're doing as a leader, right? Like, be like, hey, here are my superpowers. Here's what feels easy to me. So then you kind of have to like work in this way. So then I can have the highest leverage when I join an organization, which is
the secret part about leadership, I don't think people want to talk about, is leaders make people work the way they want to work. Right. And that's what I mean by the vibe, right? The vibe of the person. I mean, no one wants to really say this or admit it. And it's like, you can work whatever way you want. No, you're going to work the way the leader wants you to work. And a real conscious leader is able to understand that about themselves and introduce it into the organization in a healthy way. So by Morgan coming in and giving us his manual, he was introducing his vibe in a very structured, clear way where I, as someone who is willing to shout from the rooftops about him and our ability to work with him, was willing to tell everyone that. One of the reasons, though, is I was there months before and the executives were different. And so the team was used to something different even before I got there, right? And there were very clear examples where I was even like, hey, Morgan, I remember one specific instance where I was like, hey, Morgan, you said this in that thread over there. And this is why I love Morgan, because he could take that from me, right? But we've been friends a long time. So I was like, hey, you said that over there? And this is how that person reacted to what you said. And I know you didn't mean that. But when other executives say stuff like that, they mean the opposite of what you mean. And he took it and he's like, oh, okay, got it. Because he's awesome. Like he got it. He understood what I was saying because he thinks about this stuff. Some leaders don't think about this stuff. And then I told him, so I coached that person to respond like this to you because normally they wouldn't respond like that. And Morgan's like, thank you. Because I knew what he meant. That person didn't know what he meant. And it wasn't a confusing thing. It was just that person's reaction to every other leader's vibe and approach to the same thing. But I knew Morgan, and I knew that's not that's not the intention he had. So I was able to tell him, I was able to back channel with the person. And it was like it was an odd teaching moment from an IC to the person that manages the IC, but like he was open to it because he got it. Like he wanted it a certain way. And I read that right away. And I'm like, I've seen this story before. This is just going to go wrong if that person is not able to communicate the way they want. And the thing is, the only reason I did that is because that person pinged me and said, how do I respond to this from Morgan?
You were the translator. Before we get into the concrete examples, which I think would be helpful to like kind of define or just give people a better sense of what the environment is, the other kind of reflection that I had as you were talking was, I've been in many orgs where I feel like the vibe and the environment kind of happen subconsciously. Like there's just like a lack of intentionality, and then things start to like be disorganized or messy, or like or the founder feels like, oh shit, I just created a prison for myself and I hate working in this environment. And then they're like, oh, we need to do culture, like we need to do values, all that stuff. And I'm like, wait, like this, there might be a much like easier fix. And I think a lot of times when I've reflected when I've been in environments like that, it's almost like a lack of confidence from leadership or that founder that being like, hey, like actually like people should adapt to the way I work. And maybe also like a lack of honesty of like, hey, like actually like I thought I could be doing great work in this environment, but actually no, like I just need to be honest with myself. And I think like that almost indecision and trying to like adapt to the people under you, even though maybe it's in an environment where you just cannot be the best version of yourself, I think is like a super dangerous trap that only like gets more and more difficult 100%. As you get more people under you.
I just listened to the David Senra interview with Toby Lütke, the CEO of Shopify, and he talked about how when they were getting ready to go public, he had the story in his head about how he had to become this like, you know, he called it cosplaying, kind of like public company CEO, and had to do a bunch of these things that he thinks public company CEOs did. And he's like, it basically just went terribly. Like I hated it. And he's like, at some point when COVID happened, we had to figure out what we're going to do in response to COVID because our business was just like, you know, and no one knew what was going on in the world. And he had every single leader in the company basically roll up all of the roadmaps. And he was like, I think he took like a week and just like reviewed all the work happening across Shopify. And he was like, the majority of the work is stuff I thought we should not be doing. Like things I was like, why are we investing in this? Like there's a product for grocery stores. Why are we building Shopify for grocery stores? That makes no sense. Like why? That's not aligned at all with what I want us to do, right? And he realized like there was just like, to your point, Marc, there's just factors, right? Like things happen, like life happens, things happen. And before you know it, you don't recognize the company. And hopefully if you're a high agency, incredibly talented CEO like Toby, you take control of the situation and you're like, actually, this is how we're going to work. Like I'm running this place. This is how this company is going to run. You could stick around and play this game, or you could go play a different game. And I agree with you. I wish more CEOs were just honest about the game they want people playing at their company. And that's environment design. Isn't that a game? All a game is?
Imagine if he figured that out earlier, how much bigger Shopify would already be. Like this is the mission in my mind, right? It's like people need to realize that it's their company and it's their vibe. And if they can come into work and have energy every day, the company will win. And if they can't, the company will suffer and the people will suffer. And we don't want people to suffer. But in most companies, people are suffering for this exact reason you said, Marc, and the doubling down you did, Ben. So I do wonder, like, that's great, Toby, but what would have happened if you figured that out earlier? I think, yes, it's admirable that he figured it out. And like, it is a very common thing that a lot of founders go through when their companies go public. But I really do wonder, if I were asking him about that, I would ask him, before you went public, were you operating like that or not? And I wonder where that nuance is, because I don't know the answer. I'm not going to think I'm him. And I think it's a very deep question, but that's what I'm wondering. And then was it COVID or was it being a public company CEO that actually changed your framing? And so I wish younger Toby knew that for the world, because then maybe Shopify would be that much bigger. And again, I know I'm talking about a massive company, so no knock on anything, but this is the founder stuff I think about when it comes to environment fit and vibe and all these things, which is like, what would happen if more people just understood who they were and owned it?
I
Yeah.
think my read of that situation, because I think as I was listening to that episode, I was also thinking about Brian Chesky at Airbnb when COVID was
Yeah.
happening, and kind of like Tale of Two Cities. And my kind of like read in response to what you just said is like, sometimes I think a crisis will force people to like shed all the bullshit and just be like, what do I actually want? Like, what's actually important? What's all the cruft, right, around it? And then I think the key is like, you could potentially operate. I'm told that Brian Chesky basically manufactures crises on a regular basis at Airbnb, so like keep people on their toes. And maybe that's because he learned that that's when the best decisions getting made. That's how you avoid getting fat. I don't know, but I think there's a connection.
I'll give you some context there because I have some adjacent context. So I think everyone knows this, but President Obama is good friends with Brian and is one of Brian's advisors. I think this is public, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure it is. And because Brian has said it, and I've heard Obama say it too. So, what I was going to say about that is my uncle worked at the DoD, so the Department of Defense, right? When it was called that. I think it's called the Department of War now. He's no longer alive, so I think he's happy. I don't know what he would have liked, but he was like, he had 5 graduate degrees, and he was like consigliere to a bunch of like folks in the DoD. I don't think I could say more, but like he's not alive anymore, so I probably could. But anyway, so and he was very eccentric because he had 5 master's degrees, came here in like the 70s, so it's been here quite a while. And I asked him like, change. How does change happen? So there's 2 things he said. One is just a nice little anecdote, which is like, hey, that president keeps changing, but we don't.
Hmm.
So that was a very interesting insight because if execs change, but the ICs don't, they feel the same way. It's like, oh, new exec, new thing, it'll go away eventually because there'll be another exec. So that shed light on that framework. I was like, oh, crap, you're right. The second one he said is nothing changes without fireworks. Nothing. So I was like, okay, cool, got it. I've used that strategy. So I think Brian Chesky, knowing that Obama, like I'm making the connection that knowing that Obama is his advisor, knowing that the government works like this, that's probably really good advice because the government is a longstanding organization and he has the, leader of the free world, as we used to call them, anymore or not, who knows, but that's what we used to call him, like telling him this. And that person deals with more everything than anyone and is embedded in an environment they did not create. So they have the tactics that they need. So anyway, that's the connection I would make that came to mind when you were talking about that.
Like the focus on competitors, right? And like having like a nemesis. That's another perfect example of like those like constant fireworks. Like, oh shit, they just launched this feature. Like Anthropic, OpenAI, like, like to go no farther. And I'm sure like the roadmaps would look very different. And
I mean, even Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, if you guys have watched The Last Dance, he literally made up a story in his head about someone from the other team saying some shit to him that got him all riled up, and just to like juice himself up to beat them.
That's what does it.
Like, so I think everyone's got to figure out what their source of energy, like what's.
Yeah,
I mean, part of your job as a leader is to understand the energy source of the organization.
Yeah.
Right? And for some organizations might get really fired up through competition. Let's beat the other guy. But if you try to infuse the let's beat the other guy, energy source into an organization that's more motivated by like our own vision and like running our own race,
it won't work.
It's not inspiring. Like I've been there.
And,
I don't get inspired personally by beating someone else. I get inspired by doing the best I can do.
Yeah, same here. And on that note, I think I can give my example because it's very related. So in our org, in the companies that I tend to operate, if I'm responsible, like what we did at the company that I sold to Dropbox before we sold it when it was a startup, we also pivoted once. It was an enterprise search tool, then we pivoted into IT and security.
Because of FYI that became
it was
Nira?
FYI and then it became Nira. Yeah.
Right.
And what we did was we had a culture, really an environment that was measure twice, cut once. And so when I think about environment fit, there's 2 examples I can give you from 2 different areas. One is a business area, product growth, and another is, let's say, engineering. So on engineering, we had the system where if an engineer had 90+% confidence in their plan, only then can they move forward with writing code or writing production ready code. So what my thesis of environment fit and how to recruit for environment fit comes in, because I think that's a really key piece, is one, you got to know the environment. So we knew it was measure twice, cut once. It was that across the company. On engineering in particular, it was very important to us because of I'd worked with people I'd worked with before, but we had patterns that proved that was how we liked doing things and we're very effective at that. So we pulled a piece of the environment out into the recruiting process. So if you were a backend engineer, you would build a link shortener, not build, but you'd be given, I'll tell you what it is in a sec, but it'd be link shortener as your assignment. And it would be to-do list if you're a front end engineer. I know the lines are blurred now, but like back then it wasn't quite like that. Even today, this would still work because you're still hiring for those roles at the moment. So basically you were given a 2-page brief and all we wanted was your plan. So if you were building a to-do list app and you're a front-end engineer, got your plan, not code, unless you wanted to. We weren't asking you to build it. Just wanted you to make a plan of how you would build that. And that included things like there was this vacation time or this other thing. Like, when you do these really well, there's tricks in them. Not tricks you're trying to get someone to pick up, but things that you're putting in there so that you can test what you want to test for, right? And so what we were testing for was quality of thinking before someone wrote code. Now, there are great people that do no measurement and just cut, meaning just write code. Those people, if you can think about what I just said, would never pass this test. And they should never be in our environment because we didn't know how to operate the way that they like to operate. So what we would do is someone would come and do like the to-do list planning. Then we'd get on a 90-minute call with them. 60 minutes of it was as if they were in the job with their boss getting reviewed on their plan. So the hiring manager, who was the boss getting on the call, would basically score their plan on a bunch of factors. We actually used Airtable at the time, a bunch of factors before they talk to them. Then they would talk to them as if they're in the role, getting feedback and giving feedback on their plan. So how do they react to the feedback? I mean, you name it, right? Because you have the manager doing it that's going to be doing it in the future if this person's hired. And then we would basically rescore them. And only then would they go to culture or any of the other stuff, because we knew they were a fit in the environment, or we felt good about their fit in their environment, or we felt good about coaching them, or we felt good that they had a good measured twice bias, right? Because that's what we needed.
Feedback.
They can take feedback. All of that gets tested real fast in a scoped way. This is why companies like Linear and other ones, I don't know if they're still doing it, do the 2-week trials and stuff like that. We just found a better way, which is literally, you could do this with any environment. Take a critical piece of it out, which is not just for that team, but an entire ethos in the company, because that's really what you need there, and put it there.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Marc and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
So another example before I stop, product. When we hired for product, we didn't hire a lot for product, so we hired a growth person, which I would consider product in this context. They were basically asked to do research. We gave them some plan, similar thing, and they were asked to do research, and then we gave them feedback on their research. And that was the same thing, because in our environment, we always did research before we built the product. Customer interviews, customer development, whatever, right? Same exact thing. So I can play this out in any environment where you are increasing your chances of hiring the best person for the job.
Does that still work for managers and execs, or is it way more fuzzy?
No, and in fact, someone wrote a book, and there's a methodology that I absolutely love that kind of even mimics some of the stuff I have, but for executives. And it's called the WHO method, and it's really developed around knowing what you need. So the internal job description is so good that you write, then finding people that have done that 2 or 3 times before, which I know is a tactic in general. But then the interview process is this rigorous one where you're just, and people loved it though, because it wasn't like puzzles or weird questions. It was literally what did you do in this scenario in the past? And going through each of their jobs, because they would have at least 2 or 3 they've done it before at, where you're trying to suss out all that. Then at the end of that process, and again, there's this whole funnel of like how many people should move through each step. And there's like a long, like 2-hour or 90-minute interview and stuff. And it's like intense, but in a good way. But at the end, you show them the internal JD for the person you want to hire. And guess what they usually say? And if they don't say this, you didn't hire the right person. That sounds like me and the job you're hiring me for. Like, that's how great that recruiting process works. And that is yet another environment fit thing if you really think about it, because up front, you're saying, this is exactly what we need. Then you're finding people who have done that 2 or 3 times before, and you hire those people. You don't hire executives that haven't done it 2 or 3 times before if you're hiring executives, period. Like, otherwise, you should be building those executives.
Just hiring
team.
from within. Yeah,
all
within.
good. I'm not saying you always need to hire someone that's done it 2 or 3 times before, but hire from within. Don't hire from outside someone who hasn't, because it's just not going to probably work out. In fact, I don't know the data, but the data probably will show that.
Are not successful. Marc, I don't know. We've talked about at least about product executives, but I think it's like 12 to 18 months is like the typical.
Yeah. And CROs are like less, like 8 months.
Yeah. And we hired a head of sales that I would still work with. And he fit our environment, and like, it was amazing, like what he did. And we use this method. So even for execs, you can do this.
I think what I love about what you're sharing is something that I find myself telling people a lot in the context of like, it's generally PM interviews, but I think it applies to any interviews. And to be honest, I also think it applies to like dating and other parts of life. I mean, I'm married for 10 years, but friends, which is all about fit. And it's not like if someone's not a good fit, there's nothing wrong with them and there's nothing wrong with you. And yet, when a company passes on a candidate, for example, and just says not the right fit for the role, the candidate will often take that as some indication that they did something wrong, or like they'll take it as an indication that their value is lower. Same with a company. If a company gives an offer to a candidate and they accept an offer from a different company, they will take that. Like, sometimes I know people will like, that guy's dead to me now. Like, I gave them an offer, they said no, like, F that guy. And I just feel like it's so immature, because it is all about fit. At least if you're being intentional about things, it's about fit.
Yeah, I had a friend who's probably better for a Series B, C, D plus company, and maybe even a public company in his role. And a Series A company rejected him. And yet he's interviewing with some really awesome B, C plus companies, and they're moving forward and all that. And he was all bummed out. I'm like, hey, you don't want to work there anyway. Right?
But people want to be wanted, right?
So
it's
why
like
are you upset?
ego.
Why are you upset? And he's a friend who I can say this to, but I was like, why are you upset? Forget it. Like, just forget it. That was awesome that you had that experience and you talked to those people, but like, that wasn't a fit, like, period. Like, you weren't going to thrive there. And maybe they figured it out. Maybe they didn't. And he's like, oh yeah, they just picked the candidate, that had friends at the company. I'm like, yeah, then why are you even worried about this even more? Because like, you didn't have friends at the company. You weren't going to get hired. And more importantly, he didn't want the job. So yeah, I'm doing that constantly. Same thing you're saying, right? It's like, hey, you didn't want it. Why are you thinking you wanted it? And like you said, we want belonging. We want all that. So you're kind of fighting human nature when you try to like get past those kind of feels. But like, if you really think about it objectively, you want to be in an environment where you feel like you have energy. And essentially, if the CEO has energy for the environment, they've probably created an environment that if you match it, you will thrive. And I just don't think we recruit like that. And I don't think we think like that. And that's like probably the number one most unfortunate thing I think that's happening right now at companies, or has been for quite a long time.
I want to get into bots at some point, but maybe the final question, just from a selfish point of view, that I'm really curious about is like, as a founder and as a leader, how often are you thinking about your environment and the environment that you're creating for your team? And maybe like, when do you think, and what triggers you to be like, hey, we need to change something here? Like what is that interest, And I know introspection, had a moment this week, but maybe like, just walk me through, how do you think about that?
Yeah, some guy with your name talked about it not being introspective.
Those Marc with the C, they're dangerous.
A guy who runs a company with a guy with my name.
Yeah, there you go.
A little bit
yeah,
more
so
hair,
I'm with you
fortunately.
too. You guys tell me what's up with this. I think it's a really good question. And I think a lot of it for me has to do with when I think we're off in terms of what we want to achieve. And I think there's a lot of things that come into that, but like most of it is when we're off on what we're trying to achieve. That's when I do the fireworks and try to give the justification. I think a lot of people have different processes for doing stuff like that. I found at earlier stage companies, the fun part is not when you involve everyone in that decision because it's already stressful. So if the founders are helping make that pivot or change or the fireworks decision with whoever they trust to give an opinion on it, everyone else, it's actually usually better that everyone else kind of not gets in line, but either opts in or opts out of those changes because you just don't have time to get everyone's opinion about something. While at larger companies, there's always multiple people that you're trying to appease, regardless of level or seniority or anything, because you need their buy-in or something's going to get stuck with what you're trying to do. And I think this is why you don't see those big companies think about environment enough. Part of the reason is the founders and the CEOs are outsourcing the visibility of the environment to just about everyone. CFO, HR, those kind of G&A style departments, so to speak, get outsourced the visibility and the environment changes. And it just takes too long often, and it's often wrong. And that's because their perspectives are very HR or finance and not CEO, vision, opportunity, and all that. And ideally, I think CEOs that actually can execute and get down in the weeds and then go pull themselves all the way back up too are probably going to be the most effective going forward. And again, you mentioned Toby, Ben, but like I see Toby doing that way more than most public company CEOs. I don't know enough about Brian. It sounds like he probably does that. But Toby, I see like I'm using something he open sourced and worked on. Like,
I mean,
and that's the CEO of
or
Shopify.
yeah,
I'm using
I mean,
this
or
every day talking about bots, Marc. So
yeah, I mean, Jensen is another example, right? Like the guy
yes.
literally like is begging people like ICs be like, tell me like things that are not working and give me your ideas, and he like reads every single one of those emails, right? Like,
yeah, and the whole reporting structure he has, like that's actually very similar to the reporting structure I enjoy at my things. Again, not trying to compare myself, but I love it when I heard what they said about his structure, which is like no one-on-ones, all that stuff. Yeah, like you do the one-on-one, not for the one-on-one. So then why are you doing the one-on-one? You're doing it for some other reason. And if it's checking a
totally.
box or something and you're CEO and you can say, I don't need to check that box and we're going to operate this way, you're better off. But that doesn't mean he doesn't talk to his people, right?
Totally.
Like that's the funny part
He
that
probably
people get
talks
wrong.
more to them, right? Because like if they're emailing him every day, like
Right.
I was actually just, it's funny you bring that up because, sorry, I keep bringing up David Senra, but I think he's a great interviewer. And I was just listening to his interview with Michael Ovitz when I was kind of like making lunch earlier. And Michael Ovitz talked about when they were building CAA, he would always he would do a whole tour of the CAA headquarters every night about 30 minutes
By
before
the way,
he
Ben,
left.
do you want to share a little bit more context like CIA? Because I don't know if everyone knows what that is.
So Mike, by the way, excellent memoir / autobiography if people want to check out like who is Michael Ovitz by Michael Ovitz started CAA, which is I think the #1 talent agency in the world. Basically all like the best actors, directors, writers, studios, they represent them and kind of basically monopolized Hollywood talent so they can make movies happen that wouldn't happen otherwise.
Yep.
And it's just like a really great story. But Michael Ovitz is a very quirky, and very particular kind of character, and he created CA from scratch. But in the context of like how solving problems at the company was like the context of what they were talking about and like growing CAA. And he talked about how, I don't know exactly, it was like at some point in the afternoon and he would do a round around CAA and just like literally poke his head into every part of the office. I think he took 20 minutes or so to like, just like say hi to everyone. Okay. And what he was listening for is awkward tones or like tones that are like, something felt kind of off about that. Hey, like, and so he would tell people that he picked up on that with, come by my office later. And so he was like creating the conditions in which he only basically had these one-on-ones with people at the end of the day if he detected something was like not going well. And I thought that was really smart because the default is you have one-on-ones with like the same people all the time. You manufacture shit to come up with. If I had nothing to talk to my manager about when I was working and I owned the agenda for the one-on-one,
Painful.
I had to come up with shit to talk about. It was performative. So anyways, I think that's really good advice, is just like create the conditions in which the feedback comes to you and like you can do shit about it.
That's right.
And then obviously like I do struggle with like the first thing you mentioned, and I'd love for you to like double click on it if you're willing to, which is like, and then Mark, if you want, we can get into bots. But the idea is like, when do you feel it's important to change the environment or modify the environment? And what I heard from you is some version of, we're not getting to where we need to go, or like the path we're on is not going to get us to where we need to go, so we need to like change something about that. And my question for you is, if it's directionally going where you want it to go, but it's maybe not going as fast as you want it to go, or it's not like accelerating the way you want to, do you feel the
That
same
counts.
exact way about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
100%, because it's an environment problem. When we're not going fast enough, I'll go thrash so much stuff to just figure out what the heck's going on and what's the problem if I don't know. The smaller org is, the more likely I know.
Okay.
And the more likely I caused it. And then I have to go undo it. It's my fault, right? And that's where the introspection thing this week was really funny, because how do you know if something's your fault or not if you're not introspecting? I don't know.
Well,
the
I think
answer
my
to that.
read, by the way, just because I do think it's an interesting, I've been thinking about that a lot this week too, about the whole introspection thing. And I think where I'm landing is because like I've observed, I mean, we're talking about Marc Andreessen, right? So like, if you look at what Marc Andreessen, obviously like super accomplished founder and investor and like all the accolades that you could think of, by all objective standards, incredibly successful. And incredibly successful doing hard things too, right? Like these are not easy things to do. There's no world in which, in my head at least, there's no world in which he has been able to accomplish these things without having an incredible attunement to things not working, an incredible attunement to like levers and systems and like people, and like, what do you do through people? What do you do yourself? So even if he doesn't think of himself as like an introspective, self-reflective person, I suspect he's like world class at diagnosing and critiquing systems and environments to design them.
Yeah.
If he doesn't view that as introspective work on himself, I don't care. But like, I think that is what he must be very good at, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I just think it's the current thing and he caused it. And so we'll talk about it. It's that simple. And he knows how to do that, and respect for doing that, because it's in so many of our heads. But I think it was a little controversial, and I think it's incorrect, to be honest. But I get why he said it, and I respect that he said it. And in fact, knowing the environment today, I'm actually glad he said it, because there's something about what he's saying, if you really go root cause it, that I think he's right about, which is like, we just think too much. Like there's so many times this week, I think earlier probably said that to you, Marc, right? When we were talking about bots, right? I was like, hey, you're overthinking, right?
Totally.
Like, so to me, if he's saying people are overthinking things and that's what he means by introspection, I'm 1000% there, but I'm a very introspective person. So
yeah, I mean, I also think like, I've talked about how I love this book called The Courage to be Disliked. I don't know if we've
my
ever
favorite
talked.
too. It's
Yeah, you love
literally
that
my
book?
favorite book. Yeah.
Okay.
I have an Albot for Alfred Adler. Actually, it's one of my 12. Yeah.
Do you really?
I also
that's
have an
awesome.
Alfred too.
So, but like, I think the Adlerian psychology, which is kind of made accessible through the dialogue form of the way they wrote The Courage to be Disliked, is all about like, don't reminisce too much. Don't get pulled into like reflection on the past too much. It's all about kind of like forward thinking. And if that's, so I agree with that. And I think that some Jungian psychology and Freudian psychology tends to dwell in the past too much and keep like, digging and digging and digging in the past.
Even like AA and things like that remind you of the past a lot. No offense. It's good for people that need to take the steps, but beyond a certain point, you're kind of just circling the drain.
Agreed.
Like, anyway, you were saying.
So I agree with you. Go ahead, Marc. I do want to get to the bots. I think we've earned the right to get to the bots.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like to finalize, like I think Hiten, what you were saying was that basically your hint for updating the environment or just the hint that I need to think more about my environment is like, if I'm working on the wrong things, maybe I set the wrong goals, or maybe we're not getting to the goals fast enough, given the expectations that I had. And then that's when I do. But Yeah, let's get to the bots. I think it actually kind of ties to the introspection and the environment, to both topics in a really nice way. So yeah, before we started recording, you mentioned, you have a bunch of Mac Studios, a couple of Mac Minis in your room. So yeah, maybe like what are you doing with all this hardware?
Yeah. So this is like in some ways part of the OpenClaw craze or hype. I actually started with putting them on VPSs, so like servers that are completely isolated from the team, AWS, or any of that. I actually started with DigitalOcean there, and half of mine are sitting there. And I did that first. The reason I did that is I didn't care to put them on a machine, although there's a lot of value of putting them on a machine. But what I wanted to do was take it, throw it into a Slack. My issue was at that time, now things have changed and evolved and folks have come around, but if I went to an engineer and I did this and I got in trouble and I said, hey, here's a bot and it's running OpenClaw, they would freak out. The reason they would freak out, and this is why the bots are so powerful, is that OpenClaw, unlike ChatGPT or Claude, doesn't just give you the car and kind of let you take a wrench to it and all that. OpenClaw gives you the car and it gives you the mechanic and you have all the tools. That's my analogy. So if you take these AI chatbots and say, what is the degree of freedom I have on mechanicking it? ChatGPT and Claude are like right here. Google's probably even further back. And then OpenClaw is like, no, you can write code and execute it. So I had IT folks come in, make a bot for me, put it in Slack. Then I do one prompt and they turn my bot off. It's like, you had it write code and do that. I'm like, it was one prompt. It decided to do that. But yeah, it did that. It wrote code and executed it. So a real security professional is going to be like, no way. So that's where we were. So I was like, all right, screw all that. Not going to go convince them because they will come around when they're ready, especially if I throw a bot in Slack as a non-engineer. By the way, I'm non-engineer. I haven't written code, I haven't looked at code in forever. I used to a little bit. Now, like I'm writing tons of code and not reading any lines of it. And I'm not using Claude code
is all
either.
this at Crazy Egg?
So I have a few different products that I work on and with other people. At Crazy Egg, we actually have two bots. One's called Sunny that I put in there. Another's called Scramble that the engineers put in there because they came around about a week or two after Sunny was in there. But the whole point that I wanted to make that goes back to the old one, and then we can take this wherever you folks want, or the original point was, if Slack is where work happens, that's our environment. You don't want bots that are not in our environment for one reason, which is we all should be working with the bots. And a lot of, if it's not in that environment, we're not collaborating with the bots. So the amount I've learned about collaborating with bots, and even our team has learned, is literally through the roof. I don't know anyone I can talk to that knows about how two bots communicate together the way I do to get work done. For other reasons, like Moltbook and all these things that are like playthings or toys, those are super interesting, but those are not interesting to me, like personally. Personally, what's interesting is how do these things fit in our work, like exceptionally? Because what they can do is exceptional, and how they respond is like a human. So why not put them in the most human concentrated environment possible that we all use? I can't go make a robot and put them in my office. I don't have offices either. I do remote work. So I put them in a Slack. But you were saying, Ben.
No, I want to confirm you're helping me connect the dots on something I haven't thought about before. Okay. So like I want to make sure I'm getting it. So let's say Marc and I, we collaborate a lot, not just on this podcast, but we collaborate on Insider Loops. Yeah. We have a whole repo. We have some skills and agents that help us run the things we do together. We don't have and we're in a Slack channel. We have a lot of one-on-one Slacks. We also have a Slack channel with an awesome person named Terim that helps us with the podcast. But we don't actually have a Slack channel with a bot that like does any of our AI work for us. So what I'm hearing from you is that to you is like, there's like a little light bulb that's going off in my head, which is like if I was thinking about things the way Heaton's thinking about things, I would be thinking about how can I take more of the work that we do together, keep it where we do our work together, like in Slack, but potentially leverage bots and bring them into our environment so that we could literally collaborate with them the way we would collaborate with like a person that was doing that work for us.
So I have a Slack that's a personal Slack, and it was on a while ago, and then it was just dormant. I wasn't even in it. I turned it on once I figured out this OpenClaw stuff. And literally, this is how I teach friends. So the way I teach or work with colleagues is in the Slacks for those things. So I was like, wait, I have these awesome friends. This stuff's awesome. I know they're not setting up OpenClaw and they have hesitations, but yet they're tech forward, whatever you want to call it. And so I basically would invite them to the Slack, bring them in to a channel. They can't direct message the bot. I think that's just, there's some issues and nonsense around that like I don't think you should do in most cases. Bunch of reasons, but I put them in a channel with the bot, and then I start talking to the bot. In fact, I was on Jason Calacanis's podcast Twist because I said something on Twitter, and I brought him in, and I showed him how that works.
Just like observe.
Yeah. I brought him in and made a JCal channel, Jason Calacanis channel, and I even gave it his book and did a bunch of stuff that my bot knows how to do with that stuff, and like showed him how it works. But I've been doing that with friends to show them how a bot in there, how a bot should behave at work or could behave, or what you can do with it. And I'm going to write an article on this, but I'm calling this, a friend of mine and I were talking and he came up with it. But he said, oh, you're pair prompting. I've never heard of that. I'm like, yep, I'm pair prompting, right? Like, and what that means is I'm in a Slack with a human and a bot. And it gets even interesting when you have Slack with humans and bots with a S, which is another thing we've been experimenting with a lot. I know I mentioned this earlier in the pre-show, but I have a thread that's 800 messages long with 2 bots and built an entire product soup to nuts without touching a line of code, clicking through the product. I still haven't. And the bot, one of the bots, there was a senior bot and a less senior bot. And the senior bot was giving advice to the less senior bot, like pair programming. And I was in there. And out of those 800, I'm about only 40 of those messages. And I was getting screenshots and videos and things like that from the bot. Why? Because the bot's sitting on a machine. So that's why the machines are very valuable. Whether it's a machine in the cloud that can run a browser and all that, you could do that. They have Mac Minis in the cloud, but even even like the other like Linux and all that have browsers. You can play around like that if you wanted to. I just like it on the minis, but then I can also juice up the RAM and use local models, which I'm fascinated by. So to answer your question, Mark, I'm super fascinated by all this stuff. And now I'm just trying to buy these machines, which are very hard to buy now, that have lots of RAM, so I can figure out what can we do locally. What can we do with a hybrid locally in that? Because I just spent X amount of money on this box. I turned the box on. The electricity cost is negligible. At what amount of time do I get an ROI? And I'm not talking about like crypto or auto trading, all that. Those are all fine and dandy and cool. But I'm talking about things we do at work. So if I pay like $5,000 for this machine, how can I get my $5,000 back at work? Right. So that's the experiment. Those are one category of experiments I'm very eager to run. Also, the dependency on Claude and OpenAI and all that, like it's nice to have a hybrid. Let's just put it that way. And it's nice to have a lot more control, but I can mechanic the entire machine and the AI all in one and make it run local models and do all these fantastic things. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like I do have an OpenClaw, and then I also like have been adopting all the features that the Anthropic team has been adding to Cloud Code to kind of make it feel like, you have feature parity with the two. But it as you said, it's different. One was designed very different from the ground up, and the other one is you're kind of just adding a collection of features, but the whole vibe is so different. It's hard to explain, but yeah, I think you get it. I'm curious. So I have my Alfred, and let's say I wanted to kind of get Ben to become good friends with Alfred and make it like more useful in our day to day. Like what would be like maybe like your like 2-minute or 3-minute like onboarding?
Yeah,
maybe like playbook.
I just went through this. with a friend. So like I think the simple stuff is set up an app in Slack and connect the OpenClaw to it, because wherever you're messaging it, you can message it in multiple places, right? So simple thing, set up the app. Again, just getting that out of the way. Then it's in there, right? Then the best example I've seen of showing someone or teaching someone, and I've had many folks at companies tell me this works, is like just come up with an example of something you actually want the bot to do. Put the bot in a channel with other people and go try to do the thing and show them how you prompt the thing to get the thing done. And real quickly, most people, if they're at least tech forward and like have used ChatGPT and all that, they start prompting too and learning how to prompt the thing. Because then they start seeing what's possible.
So your OpenClaw has access to like a GitHub repo, and you can go in Slack and you could prompt it, and it'll literally submit it'll make a commit to like the main branch in your repo, and you have no
We don't have that
concerns around.
everywhere because
Yeah.
everywhere we don't need that. But
Yeah.
so a couple things. One, the bots have their own repos that they're owned for the bot. So that's for sure. And that's like you don't need that, but it's really helpful when you have it and you have access to the repo. Second thing that you're kind of talking about, just to disambiguate both, is basically give the bot access to our code base. Right. So in some cases, it doesn't need that because there either is no code base or we're not interested in those use cases. But in most of the things we are, and what we're seeing is like just ridiculous stuff when it has access to the code base, like ridiculously positive stuff. Like one of my favorites is like, go look at the code base, or sorry, go look at GitHub for this project, this product. Let's say go look at the GitHub for Crazy Egg and build out the entire past and future roadmap and make sure that everything that you have written, you can trace back to code. That is one of my favorites as a PM, because then you get all these nuances. You even get like things that aren't in production yet and what's coming and even how far along it is. And then you just go from there, and it's like magic, because that is the context that turns into a lot of product marketing, SEO, all the things, right? Which is, what does a product do? And what has the best source of truth of what the product does? Not a human, the code
repo.
base.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
what can translate that to human readable language? That's code is not. An AI bot that has access to it, that's smart enough. Not like, but the OpenClaw scaffolding makes all that easy. Then there's things like I'm experimenting with, like that other people are too, but like where I'm putting the human productivity systems inside of OpenClaw for things. So like there's a para method. It's a way of storing a bunch of information. A lot of the folks who love note taking kind of invented. I think this is Tiago is the person's first name that invented it. And so my OpenClaw uses the para method because I have a lot of things around people and companies and things like that. Like I'm trying to store, analyze, or research, because a lot of stuff revolves around that, competitors, stuff like that. And so it stores it properly. But since it stores it properly, now it can retrieve it properly, and I can get it to retrieve it. That's even outside of skills or any of that stuff. It's just the storage system. Can I go make Claude code, give me that same storage system? The answer is yes. Can I get it to use it as easily as what I can do with OpenClaw? No. And the effort to even build it out in Claude code is really high. And again, so I really believe non-engineers should not be using Claude code. We should be using, and again, I know they have co-work and stuff. We should be using the non-engineering version of this stuff, because those things are designed for engineering and engineers. And that's good. They need that. But the product people need as much power, but for their use cases, right? So these are other things I'm sort of toying with.
Go ahead, Marc.
One super final question before we start closing up. So, for example, let's say I have a Mac Mini that's kind of like my kind of personal assistant, etc. Like, do you usually recommend having another one where you do work, or is it a good way to like segregate?
I wouldn't put it on your personal one. I would segregate. I would 100% segregate it.
Cool.
Is it? Do you literally think about it almost like humans with different levels of like classified access, kind of?
Yeah, I think that's a really reasonable, simple model and way to think about it, for sure. I think it's critical.
Cool.
All right, so we need another Mac Mini for you, Marc, to build our to build our.
Well, I mean, look, there's alternatives. So I'll tell you how I've done a few of these. A bunch of these machines. Well, one, I will not give it access to my emails, write versions and stuff like that.
Same.
I'm just not into that. I don't think it'll do anything silly necessarily, but it can. So I don't do any of that. I don't like this outbound emailing, or all the people that are trying to do that, I feel like are doing it because that's the best use case they can come up with. We should come up with better use cases. No judgment. You should use it for that if you want. I just don't. But what I do, and what you could do on your own computer, if you wanted to, is you just create a new user. and you give as much of a blank slate in that user account, like it doesn't even have access to the other apps and stuff like that if you want. Although if it has access to the apps, it doesn't have access to the local data because it's essentially another instance. So you could do that and do it. I have these machines where I have multiple bots, but I just switch the user.
Like the Mac user, basically. Like you have multiple
you
users.
got it.
But then can you, I'm sorry, this is like super detailed now, but just curious. Like if you have a Mac Mini that has 3 different users and each user represents, what would you call it, an agent or a bot? What would you
Let's
call
say
it?
a bot. Sure.
A bot.
It has an
Is it-
OpenClaw instance running. Don't
is it
get
like
me
a-
into bots within bots, but there's a thing.
But is, okay, so an OpenClaw instance equals bot, which can equal 1 user. If someone wants to load up multiple bots into 1 user, they can, but you're saying if you want specific permissions. Okay, so you can message that bot. Like let's say you have 3 users on a bot. You could let's say you have you said Telegram, right? Or Slack or whatever. You could message those bots, all 3 of them, even if
I haven't tried all 3 at the same time yet on the same machine. I usually just switch them, but I'm also trying to sandbox them. But I think, I don't know, this is a good test. If you have all users logged in theory, it should work. In theory. Yeah, but I have not played with that, but that's an interesting one.
Yeah, at the same time. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't tried that piece yet, so I have to switch as of right now.
So you're saying the kind of like crawl before you walk thing is just like 1 Mac Mini with 1 user, with 1 OpenClaw instance, for 1 bot that has just for personal use is where you generally tell people to start?
Yeah, or do the BPS thing if you don't want to go waste money on a bot. So I spend $30, $40 at DigitalOcean. There's cheaper alternatives, but it's a hosting company, right? And then you just throw the OpenClaw in there. Setup's not that hard. I have instructions. I've written them by hand. And like you can install
the old
it
way.
and then get it in. Yeah, the old way.
Why didn't you have your OpenClaw do it for you?
It feels good to do stuff by hand, man. And in fact, that's context to get it to go do whatever I want with it too, right? But it just feels good to do it. I took the screenshots, guys. I took the screenshots and put them in there.
All right. Do you literally type the old way or do you use voice dictation?
I do both, but I'm not. I do both, but I always loved voice memos and shoving them into AI. So like all the dictation stuff, it's like I don't use tools for it and don't need them, but like. Yeah, I love voice to text and all that.
Yeah, great.
Sweet.
All right, should we start wrapping up?
Yeah.
Cool. So first of all, thanks for hanging back. This was awesome. This flew by, and I could definitely have kept going, but I want to be mindful. It's Friday. So first off, if people want to learn more, Hiten, about what you're thinking about these days, I know you're not hard to find online, but where would you route them to kind of hear more about what you're thinking about these days? And then secondly, how can the audience be helpful to you?
Yeah, I'm pretty loud on LinkedIn and Twitter as much as I can be, but I have a domain that I've now lit up, which is my firstname.com. So it's Hiten.com, and like there is probably where the latest stuff will be, or at least the most timely stuff. And then it has links to my Twitter and stuff. So that's probably the easiest one, Hiten.com.
Cool. And then if the audience, anything the audience can be helpful for you or anything you're excited to kind of drive some attention towards other than that?
Feedback. I love feedback. Feedback is so hard to get. So the only ask I have of anyone listening is if you have any feedback for me on anything I've said or anything I've ever said that you've read, please. I love the feedback. I don't care if it's good, bad, or ugly.
Do you have a preferred way of receiving feedback?
Whatever. Even my Twitter account at Gmail, my username at Gmail is it. DMs are open, like all of it. I don't care. Like I'm one of those people that grew up with the internet, right? IRC, BBS, Prodigy, AOL, you name it. Like how can I dictate how someone wants to contact me? But yes, all the things are open anyway.
Cool.
So
someone's like,
you find
Hiten, you suck.
Alfred's
or
email.
Hiten, you're great. Yeah, Alfred's. I love it. Cool. Okay, so that's awesome. And then, Marc, do you want to ask a gratitude corner?
Yeah, let's do it. So we like to end what we call gratitude corner. And basically, we want you to maybe think of someone that has played an important role in your career. And maybe just take this opportunity to call them out and say thank you.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm going to call out Morgan Brown, who was my boss at Dropbox, and I've known him for like 20-ish years. And I think I went into that job because I sold my company to Dropbox, having a blank slate, coming from a startup, and it's complete at that point in terms of our personal journey of it. And he came on board a few months later, and he was my manager and taught me more than I thought I would learn in 15 months at a big company, and more meaning like 10, 100x more than I thought I'd learn. And it was I can directly correlate that to the efforts that he had me do, and also the discussions we had and all that. So I really cherish the time there. So I'll call him out. And like, if you ever get a chance to work for him, I would do it if I were you.
Amazing. Shout out
Amazing.
to Morgan Brown. We'll link
Yep.
to him in the show notes. And
Awesome.
if we're ever lucky enough to have him on the podcast, maybe we can go deeper with him on his management philosophy and style. But it sounds like he had a really big impact on you. Also, the chance to have someone who's like a longtime friend end up being your manager after they joined a company that bought your company. I feel like not a lot of people are in that situation.
First job in my life too, Ben. So it wasn't, it was even worse. So like, I don't wish managing me on anyone, but I would work for Morgan again. I'd have him be my manager if I had the opportunity and it made sense, because, and I can't say that about anyone, maybe my father, but that's about it. Those are the only people that should try to manage me. So, yeah, but he did a fantastic job, if I do say so myself, in dealing with me.
That's high praise. And
yeah,
awesome.
he deserves it. Yeah.
I love this conversation. And I think this is a perfect place to wrap it. So that's a wrap.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Hiten.
Thanks, guys. That was a lot of fun.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Marc a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.